This is UX and Dev playing nicely together. And the way this is going to work is I'm going to give a brief introduction about how we got UX and Dev playing nicely together, and then I'll introduce our panel, and they'll take questions from you guys about our process and how we got UX and Dev playing nicely together. So again, I'm Jess Hang, and I have a background in software development and moved into a UX career. And I work for Rock Creek Strategic Marketing, and it was traditionally a design shop that started doing web CMS development, and with that brought some web developers and these cross-functional team members. And what happened was these teams would work kind of independently of one another, creating an artifact and passing it on to the next team. And what we found was that wasn't really effective, so we changed that process, and that's how UX and Dev got to playing nicely together. So we'll talk to you about that today. So on each of our projects, the mission is really to build the thing that people want to use. And the players of this team are really the client, the project manager, the visual designers, the UX team, and then the developers. And at each phase of the life cycle, basically, each character has a different mission or goal. So our clients usually want us to build what they want us to build. Project managers want us to create something that's within time, budget, and scope of the project. Visual designers want to build something or make something that's aesthetically pleasing and solves problems but doesn't really compromise the design. UX people want to create something that is intuitive and ultimately something that people want to use. And our developers want to build something that uses the current technology to solve problems. But if everybody has a different goal, like how do we get on the same page to ultimately build the thing that people want to use? So we found that common knowledge is essential to having this team collaboration. So first of all, everyone needs to know their own roles. Well, their own role, and then the roles of everyone else, and the strengths of the team. So you can go to talk to whoever you need to talk to. Secondly, the project scope. So what are we building and why are we building it? And this is important to know so everyone stays on track. And then third, get out of your comfort zone. So working across functional teams isn't easy. And so what we found is being able to know a little bit about what each person does is really important so that you can speak a common language. So because I come from a software development background, I find it easier to speak with developers about the things that I need them to do and bring up problems that potentially could impact the project or the timeline. But it's a little different for me to talk to visual designers because I don't have such a background, so I had to learn how to speak to them effectively. So getting out of your comfort zone to speak this common language is really important. So before going into Mario's underwater level, you probably need to know that so you're prepped with a frog suit. Similarly, we have to know the process in which we're working so that we can work effectively. So what that means at Rock Creek, we practice some agile methodologies. First, increase collaboration. So at each phase of the life cycle, every team member is fully engaged, and so we don't have to ramp up someone when it comes to development time because they should know from the get-go what we're building and why we're building it. So this is really increased collaboration at every phase. Secondly, process adaptability. So requirements change, that's just a given. And so everyone needs to be able to adapt as the process, with the process or the project. And lastly, team input on artifacts. So at each phase, like everyone is engaged and everyone's working together. And this is actually where our teams got to working better together, specifically with creating digital prototypes. And that's what they're going to be telling you about today. So we've implemented this on some projects, and we'll take questions from you guys. So let me introduce you guys to them. So again, this is Sarah Thrasher. She has come from a design background and is now a developer. Andrew, he is a UX strategist, and he came from a design background as well. And then Michelle, she is a UXer, and she came from a design background too. So I'll get this started with like a question or two, and if you guys have questions, just feel free to raise your hands and I'll call on you guys and you can ask these guys questions about the UX and development playing nicely together. Okay, so do you guys have mics at work? Okay.
We're set. We're good.
Okay.
I'm sharing with Andrew.
Okay. So how involved actually is the UX team in the development process and vice versa? How involved is the development team with the UX process?
Well, from my perspective, like when we were more traditional, like the waterfall approach that we had got into from print design, a lot of times because people are so focused on putting out a good product, their portion of the like spec'd out timeline with all the Gantt charts and whatnot would eat up all of the time we would have to actually finish putting out a product. And then as like the front end developer, I'd be slammed with like, all right, well, what can we do in 2 weeks? Are you guys gonna, And we're like, no, this is really bad. Could we have, involved us earlier? We've got a bunch of issues. And it's not just, like front-end development stuff. The 508 team really appreciates, seeing the work in stages and small chunks and being able to put in feedback while things are still changeable. Because like you don't want to start going down like, all right, we've got all these specs, we've got this huge pile of specs, and something in here is really bad, and we need to rethink a whole lot of stuff. And okay, maybe we're going to have to extend the project or something to actually put out the product we intended to put out. Yeah. So I think that the iterating and the collaborating and people actually coming together and talking has been fantastic.
Yeah. I'm just going to make a couple points on the UX side of things. Sarah and I worked on a project over the past year that it was a little bit of a different process at Rock Creek because, well, strangely, we wanted to actually talk to each other and not work in silos. And I think from the UX perspective, it's really vital from the very beginning, even when you're sitting down and you haven't even had a conversation with the client, but you're sketching out ideas, you're theorizing, you're contemplating to bring in everybody that's involved in the team. I'm talking the project manager, I'm talking design, I'm talking development, because this brainstorming session that you're going to be having shouldn't be all secluded into the user experience, because development is definitely going to have ideas in terms of if I come up and say, I want to build a calendar, and this calendar needs to be responsive. Well, it's up to me to lean on the development team to give me some ideas and concepts of, is there low-hanging fruit that we can use? Is there something that's already out there in a plugin in Drupal or in another application? Or is it something that from a UX perspective, I need to really start to investigate thoroughly? So having early collaboration from even the very inception of the brainstorming is critical. And project management sometimes looks at it as a heavy lift in the beginning. So if you're looking at hour burn, everybody's going to freak out and go, oh my God, you guys are burning hours left and right. Well, there's long tail benefits to all of that because now we're all on the same path from the very beginning.
Okay, so do you feel that becoming more involved in each other's work actually dilutes your specific specializations?
Well, I actually like the fact that I'm a UXer, so I know a little bit about coding. So when I'm able to do these digital prototypes, I can actually enhance my coding skills a little bit. And actually, with this one prototype we developed was responsive, and being intimate with the code allowed me to understand the grid system a lot better from a development perspective. So I don't really think it dilutes, it just kind of strengthens, actually.
Well, I think in terms of when you're working with so many different people, so many different skill sets, I'm a big believer of T strength. And I don't know if those of you are familiar with it, what it is it's the letter T. And from the top, you have a very broad view of the project, very broad view of skill sets. But as a UXer, I specialize and ensure that my core competencies lies within research, within discovery. And I think by bringing in more people, you're going to expand your ability to understand each other's roles, each other's capabilities, which then I think is going to enhance what it is that you can begin to concentrate even more in your core.
I think also like even though we have like some crossover in our skill sets, I'm not going to expect them to like finish off all of the front end development or build a module for us. But it does let us, as we're working through a project, identify areas where we could quickly, since we use mostly Drupal and it's a CMS that has a lot of like off-the-shelf plugins, we can identify where we can use something relatively as is out of like the contrib module set, where you have like some front end elements that you could just skin maybe or do slight customization to, versus having to do a big chunk of custom work that could take more time and save time having people do like wireframes for something that basically already exists. So there's a lot of time savings in there as well.
Can you actually tell us a little bit about what tools you've been using to facilitate this?
Well, I don't know. For me, I'm a big whiteboard person. If there's Post-it notes, a Sharpie marker, and a whiteboard, I'm all over that. It's about getting people together and starting to spit out ideas. And even in some cases, if it's just heading down the street to the coffee shop or maybe even grabbing a beer, I mean, the whole point is getting you together and having that conversation. But that's just my part.
Yeah, and usually like once after all the sketching collaboration is done, we'll do a digital prototype. And so we've been using Zerb Foundation, and that's a lot of collaboration and iterative coding that we've kind of been doing together. There's also like Twitter Bootstrap if people are interested in other types of frameworks, but that's my favorite. So.
It's not so much a tool, but like once we were showing like actual positive results on a couple of projects and like people were talking to each other more, like the office has started talking about making like physical rearrangements. Like we now have, which we didn't, like a panel of standing desks where people can take their laptops and go talk to each other. And we've actually been talking about sort of moving some of the cubicle areas, so we have some spaces where people can be like heads down with their headphones on, actually, putting stuff out, and other places where it's really easy to sit and like have one of these like back and forth kind of sessions and brainstorm. And we have, a lot of places have these now, but like, whiteboard walls in a couple of conference rooms to make it really easy. Yeah. So, I mean, they're tools.
And does the collaboration really increase the time it takes to get your work done?
No. I mean, what was it? I think when we were working on the one project, I pulled you in and I said, I'm not exactly sure how to approach a problem. And I could have gone down the siloed route and had a email conversation or IM'd you or whatever the hell it is. But within, I think, a half hour, we were able to hash out some solutions very quickly. So now I know there's probably people out there going, yeah, that's all great and wonderful in a utopian world, but in terms of even just, I did have experience and worked at a company where they were very siloed and they wanted to keep us that way. So I practiced a little bit of ninja collaboration, and in lunchtime I would pull people aside and have a conversation with them and talk about the project. And I found that they wanted to do the same. The problem is there was this invisible wall that they didn't want to breach. So in any way, shape, or form, I mean, collaboration, clearly, it's going to increase your productivity immediately. Plus, for me, I've seen everybody gets on the same page way faster and you have spend less time with these meetings where you're ramping everybody back up because they were in this silo and UX was here and design was here.
I think also like, on the same project that we were working on together, where we were working with like a fairly detailed prototype using Zerb Foundation, like we weren't going to wind up using their menu piece, so that was a bit of actual custom work. And we were able to also pull in a visual designer who was actually pretty happy that he got to look at sort of like the ideas that we were, floating around for the structure, so that he had something to hang his like visual designs on too. And we like all three of us were actually sketching, like, and that wound up being like collaborative coding and visual designs, but I think that the designs got done faster because like we were all talking about it early.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone have any questions for our panelists? Go ahead.
One question, in doing your design work and coming up with your prototype, have you guys ever considered maybe using some of the wireframing tools? I know that was something that was mentioned in the UX. And they talk about that being a great way to create a prototype without having to do any code work, which which saves a lot of money from a development time frame, but yet you still need to show the customer exactly what the representation may look like. And then in many cases, depending on the wireframe and tool you use, you can migrate that right into the application code that you created. If you guys ever thought about doing anything like that, or with your code type, just go ahead and start the code and then have iterations.
Yeah, so just to repeat the question, I think it's generally, have we ever used like wireframing tools to do prototyping and bringing that into the development phase?
I would say, yes, we have used lots of wireframing tools, but before we started doing more of the digital prototyping, we mostly use OmniGraffle, which is a lot like Illustrator. You know, it's a vector kind of thing, or like what's the Windows one? Visio. Yeah. So yeah, there's tons of things. So like Foundation, which we were talking about, and then Bootstrap. Actually, they do require you to work with HTML, but like most of the people on our team are very, very familiar with HTML, and we've also been doing kind of like mentoring groups to get people up to speed if they're not. People from other teams will like help people, you know. I mean, most of us are pretty familiar with basic HTML and whatnot, but like maybe not necessarily like CSS layout or other more advanced, like, you know, maybe adding JavaScript to things. But Foundation and Bootstrap let you work around that, and like they are mostly like chunks of reusable content that basically, if you're familiar with enough HTML, you can copy and paste into a plain text document. Mm-hmm. So like it works for our group because we have a lot of generalists and a lot of people who have like a lot of cross-functional skills. Yeah. Like even when I'm working with the visual designers, like we may start off with a PSD, and then we get into the prototype, and then we've got like the live site going, and while they're making design modifications, they might be sending me PSDs, or they might just be using Firebug or dev tools and adjusting things straight in the browser and sending me snippets. So I think that it doesn't really slow us down at all, and is exactly the kind of stuff that can be used straight in a finished product a lot of times.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions for our panelists?
So is the answer that you always go and you don't use visual like iRide or something like that, or are you saying you do?
So to repeat the question, he's asking whether or not we ever use something like OmniGraffle to create, right, wireframes, or always use prototypes.
It depends on the project, but anytime I can actually squeeze in doing a digital prototype, I will, because a lot of times clients have a hard time translating paper diagrams with annotations to what they're actually going to get for their final product. So I've learned that if you do a digital prototype, it translates a lot better. They go, oh, I see what happens. This drop down actually works, and I can click and it goes to this page in this form. So whenever I can try to like squeeze in a digital prototype, I will, and I'll try to avoid doing the paper wireframes, even though I like doing it sometimes.
To build on that, from that user experience standpoint, does that cut down some of that lack of clarity or sort of expectation from that user's perspective, and kind of minimize the rework later from a visual perspective for the developers?
Yeah, I'd say yes, but then there's another benefit of it, which is a lot of times in some of the experience I've had with traditional wireframes, when the client signs off on something, they might have interpreted the functionality different. And prototyping kind of clears that up very quickly to give them workable samples to respond to.
I think we're done on time, right? So,
We got one more question.
oh, we do. Okay, so go ahead.
I would just say that there's also the danger of some clients, they're less progressive, also are, they think you've already finished the application.
Yeah, that's true.
Michelle actually.
Yeah, for one of our clients, we showed them the prototypes, and we asked what their first initial thoughts were, and they were like, this is awesome. Can we sign off on this right now? We're like, you might want to think about this a little bit. You know, they assume that we built this thing that actually is clickable, that they can just throw it onto their server and the project's over with, when we've got 6 months of development down the road. So that is something to be aware of.
Any other questions for panelists? Okay, well, feel free to grab any of us if you think of any questions. We'll be around. So thank you.